The wheel groan of the stagecoach was the only sound Cora Bellamy had truly heard for 6 days. It had scraped its way into her bones, a dull ache that matched the one in her lower back. When it finally stopped, the silence that replaced it was loud and thin. "Bitter Creek," the driver called out, his voice cracked with dust. Cora gathered the handles of her scuffed leather valise, her knuckles white. She waited for the other passengers, 2 drummers in rumpled suits and a woman in black bombazine, to exit before she moved. She was last. She stepped down onto the hard-packed dirt of the main street, and the wind hit her. It was not a breeze, it was a physical thing, a slap that carried the sharp scent of pine and the iron-gray promise of an early, high-country winter. It snatched the bonnet from her head, and she grabbed for it, her fingers clumsy, catching the ribbons just before it fled. She put the bonnet back on and tightened the bow with a trembling hand, acutely aware of the eyes on her. There were perhaps a dozen men lining the boardwalk, some leaning against the posts of the General Mercantile. Others paused on their way into the squat stone bank. They stopped their whittling, their talking, their spitting. They just looked, and in their stares, Cora saw no welcome. She saw a hard, flat curiosity, the kind a man gives a new horse, judging its teeth and its fetlocks. The women were worse, 2 of them, standing outside the dressmaker's shop, pulled their shawls tighter. Their eyes swept over Cora's traveling suit, worn clean, but visibly mended at the cuff, and dismissed her. She was a delivery, a piece of mail. She clutched her valise. It held everything. 3 patched chemises, a bar of lye soap, a tintype of a family that no longer claimed her, and at the very bottom, folded into a tight, sad square, a wedding dress of white lawn. It was not new. It had been her mother's, and it was soiled at the hem from a rainstorm back in Ohio, a stain she could not scrub out. It felt like a judgment. She looked up and down the short, bleak street, a saloon, a smithy, the mercantile, the bank, and a small sheriff's office with a sagging porch. There was no one waiting for her, no one stepping forward with a smile. Walter Price, her intended, had promised to meet the stage. His letters, short and practical, had been specific. October 14th. I will be there. It was October 14th. She stood alone, the wind whipping her skirts against her legs, the dust stinging her eyes. She had come 2,000 miles for this. She had come because she had nowhere else to go. A man finally detached himself from the front of the sheriff's office. He wore a tin star, but it was dull, and his suspenders were stained with what looked like tobacco. He did not remove his hat. "You the woman for Price?" he asked. His voice was flat. Cora nodded, her throat too dry to speak. The sheriff spat a stream of brown juice into the dust near her boot. "Well, you had a hard ride for nothing. Your groom's dead." The wind stopped. The stares vanished. The only thing in the world was the sheriff's blunt, unfeeling face. "Dead?" she managed. The word was a puff of air. "As a doornail," the sheriff said, seemingly impatient to get back inside. "Found him this morning at his cabin up on the crick, shot in the back. Place was tossed. Looked like whoever did it took his poke and his rifle." Cora's hand went to the post of the boardwalk. Her valise suddenly weighed 100 pounds. "Shot. Robbed." He had no family?" she whispered. "Got a cousin, Jed, works the livery, but he was here in town, drinking all last night. Saw him myself." The sheriff squinted at her, his gaze turning from indifferent to suspicious. "You get here. Walter Price ends up dead. Bad luck, woman. Or maybe something else." "I never met him," Cora said, her voice rising in panic. I just got here." "That's what you say." He hitched his gun belt. "Problem is, you ain't got no people here. You ain't got no claim, and you ain't got no business in Bitter Creek. The Price cabin is evidence. You can't go there, and the hotel ain't for, well, it ain't for you." The implication was as sharp as the wind. She was not a widow. She was not a wife. She was nothing.
"What am I supposed to do?"
she asked. The sheriff shrugged. "Next stage heads back east in 3 days. I'd suggest you be on it." He turned and walked back into his office, the screen door slamming shut with a final, hollow clap. Cora stood rooted. Back east. There was no back east. Back east was a locked door, a father's cold eyes, and the shame of a small, unmarked grave on a rain-soaked hill. The men on the boardwalk resumed their talk, but it was lower now, and punctuated by glances in her direction. The word was already moving through the street like a tumbleweed. Jinx, bad luck, temptress. She heard one of the women mutter it as they passed. No better than she ought to be, coming all this way alone. Probably had a man following her. Caused it all. The world began to tilt. The long, sleepless nights on the jolting coach, the bad food, the constant fear. It all rose up and threatened to pull her under. "You gonna stand there till you freeze, girl?" The voice was rough, but it wasn't unkind. Cora turned. A woman stood in the bat-wing doors of the saloon, the gilded cage painted in faded gold on the glass above her. She was older, her hair an impossible shade of red piled high, her face powdered, but her eyes were clear and sharp. She wore a dress of dark purple velvet that had seen better days, but she wore it like a queen. "Heard what Brody said," the woman continued, nodding toward the sheriff's office. "He's a cold fish. Come on in. You can't stay out here. They'll eat you alive." Cora hesitated, her entire upbringing screaming at her not to enter such a place. The woman laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Oh, don't clutching your pearls. Honey, my name's May. I run this place. It's the only roof in this town that don't care what the church ladies think. You look like you ain't eaten in a week. Come on." May held one of the bat-wing doors open, numb, and with no other destination. Cora Bellamy picked up her scuffed valise and stepped out of the wind and into the shadows of the saloon. The place smelled of sawdust, stale beer, and something sweet, cheap perfume. It was empty this early, just a bartender polishing glasses in the gloom. May led her to a small table in the back. "Sit, Augie," she called to the bartender. "Bring the girl some stew, and coffee. Hot." Cora sat, placing her valise on the floor by her feet. She did not remove her bonnet. "So," May said, sitting opposite her. She lit a thin cigarillo, the smoke curling up toward the pressed tin ceiling. "You're the mail order. Walter Price." Yes. Tough luck. Walter was a fool. But he wasn't a bad man, just tight with his money. Too tight, maybe. Got him killed." May studied Cora through the smoke. Her eyes, which had looked kind outside, were now appraising. They were the eyes of a woman who had seen every kind of brokenness. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Cora's voice was hoarse. "Softer, more teary." May took a puff. "You look hardened, like you already lost something important long before you got here. That's good. The soft ones don't last a day out here." The coffee came first, black and scalding. Cora wrapped her cold hands around the mug. The heat a sudden, sharp relief. The stew followed. It was thick with potatoes and some kind of game meat, and she ate it faster than she meant to, her hunger overriding her shame. "Sheriff Brody meant it," Cora said, setting the spoon down. "He wants me gone." "Brody wants everything easy, and a woman with no people and no money, tied to a murdered man? That ain't easy. The women in this town, they're pious, and they're bored. They need a sinner to point at. Right now, that's you." "I did nothing." "Doesn't matter." May tapped her ash into a tray. "You can stay here. For a time. There's a small room upstairs. Clean sheets. You can earn your keep. Sweep the floors. Help Augie clean the glasses. Serve the men their whiskey." "Serve the men!" Cora's stomach tightened. May saw the look in her eyes. "It ain't what you think. Not unless you want it to be. I don't run that kind of house. But the men will look. They'll talk. They'll touch your hand when you give them their change. Can you handle that? Cora thought of the wind outside. She thought of having no food. She thought of the cold eyes of the sheriff. I can handle it, she said. Good girl, May smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. Rule 1, you keep your head down. Rule 2, you don't trust anyone who smiles too pretty. Rule 3, you stay away from Jed Price. The cousin. He's a mean drunk, and he figures anything that belonged to Walter now belongs to him. That includes you. He'll be in tonight. You stay behind this bar with Augie. Cora stayed. For 5 days. She lived in the small, closet-like room above the saloon. By day, she scrubbed floors until her hands were raw, the lye soap cracking her skin. By night, she stood in the noise and the smoke, fetching bottles for Augie, her face a blank, polite mask. She endured it. She endured the whispers that followed her when she made her one daily trip to the mercantile for supplies. The women there would stop talking when she entered, then begin again in hushed, vicious tones as soon as her back was turned. Bold as brass, living at May's, knew it. She endured the cold shoulders. The storekeep would serve every other customer, even those who came in after her, before finally turning to her with a sigh. And she endured the men in the saloon. They were miners, trappers, and ranch hands. They tried to catch her eye. They called her sweetheart and blossom. She ignored it all, keeping her gaze on the glasses she filled, the coins she collected. But she could not avoid Jed Price. He came in on the 6th night, well past dark. The saloon was full, a piano rattling out a tune in the corner. Jed was a big man, broad in the shoulders, with a thick beard and small, deep-set eyes. He was already drunk, and he was staring at her. Cora moved to the far end of the bar, pretending to wipe the counter. May was upstairs, counting receipts. Augie was busy tapping a new keg. Jed lurched over, slamming his meaty hand on the bar top. You, he slurred. The little mail-order bird. Cora did not look up. What can I get you, mister? Mister, I'm Jed Price, cousin to the man you came here for. The man who's dead now. I'm sorry for your loss, Cora said, her voice flat. Sorry? He laughed, a wet, ugly sound. You ain't sorry. You're just available. Walter, he paid your passage, didn't he? That means he bought you. And I'm his kin. That makes you, well, that makes you mine. He reached across the bar and grabbed her wrist. His grip was like a steel trap. Come on, you're gonna pour me a drink. A real drink. In the back. Let go of me, Cora said, her voice low and shaking. She tried to pull her arm back, but he was too strong. Feisty. He grinned, showing brown teeth. He began to pull her, dragging her along the length of the bar, his fingers digging into her flesh. I like 'em feisty. You came here for a price. You're gonna get one. He yanked her hard, pulling her off balance. She stumbled out from behind the bar's protection. The piano stopped. The saloon went quiet. Jed shoved her back against the rough-planked wall, his body pinning her, his sour breath. A wave of whiskey and onions washed over her face. You're gonna be nice to me, girl, or I'll... A hand landed on Jed's shoulder. It was not a shove. It was just a hand, resting there with an unnatural weight. She said to let her go, a voice said. It was low, quiet, and rough as granite. Jed froze. He turned his head slowly. The man standing behind him was tall, but not overly so. He was just solid. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat, caked with dust from a long ride. His hat was pulled low, but the eyes underneath were visible in the lamplight. They were a pale, grim gray, and they held no fear at all. A gun belt was buckled low on his hips, the leather dark and worn, the handle of the pistol smooth from use. This ain't your concern, Thatcher, Jed snarled. Though his confidence was gone, he did not release Cora. It is now, the man named Thatcher said. His hand did not move from Jed's shoulder. His fingers just tightened. Jed's face contorted. A small gasp of pain escaped him. His grip on Cora's wrist flew open as his own hand went to his shoulder, trying to pry the other man's fingers loose. "Get off!" Jed grunted. Thatcher applied more pressure. It was not a fight. It was a simple, mechanical act. The big man's knees buckled. Thatcher pushed him, and Jed stumbled away, crashing into a table and falling to the floor in a heap of spilled beer and broken wood. The man, Thatcher, did not look at Jed again. He didn't look at Cora either. He turned to Augie, who was standing frozen with a bung hammer in his hand. "Whiskey," Thatcher said. He downed the drink in one swallow, slapped a coin on the bar, and turned. He walked past Jed, who was cursing and climbing to his feet. He walked through the silent saloon, pushed open the bat-wing doors, and disappeared into the night. He had not said a single word to her. The saloon erupted in noise. Jed, humiliated and furious, pointed a thick finger at Cora. "This ain't over. You hear me? This ain't over." He stormed out the doors, kicking a chair on his way. Cora was breathing hard, her back pressed against the wall, her wrist already beginning to bloom with a dark bruise. May came rushing down the stairs.
What in blazes was that? I heard the crash.
Augie explained quickly. May's face went pale. She grabbed Cora's arm, pulling her into the back room, a small office filled with ledgers.
"You're not safe here anymore, girl,"
May said, her voice stripped of its usual bravado.
"Jed won't let that go. He's been humiliated. He'll come back, and he won't come back alone, and he won't come back through the front door." "Who was that man?"
Cora asked, rubbing her bruised skin.
"The one who helped."
May lit another cigarillo, her hands shaking this time.
That was Eli Thatcher. And he didn't help you, honey. He just hates Jed Price." "Thatcher? He's a ghost. Used to be. His family owned half this valley. Best land, biggest herd. They were good people. Too good. Maybe—"
May blew a cloud of smoke.
"Years back, maybe 6 or 7, they took in a family. Some folks said they were mixed blood, running from something, stirred up trouble with the wrong men. A posse. They called themselves, rode up to the Thatcher homestead one night."
May's voice dropped.
"They burned it, burned the whole place to the ground. His folks, his younger brother. They say he had a new wife, too. All of 'em. Gone. Only Eli walked out. He vanished for 2 years. When he came back, he wasn't the same. He's empty. He lives up on the remote ridge, in an old line shack. Never comes to town unless he needs salt or shells. People leave him be. They say he's haunted. Or cursed."
Cora stared at the door Eli Thatcher had walked through. A man who had lost everything.
"Jed will be back,"
May said, pulling Cora from her thoughts.
"Tonight. Or tomorrow. And I can't stop him. Not if he's determined. No one can."
Cora looked at May. She looked at her own red, raw hands. She thought of the soiled wedding dress in her valise. She thought of the wind, and the stairs, and Jed Price's sour breath. She had nowhere to go. She looked at May.
"Where is this ridge?"
May's eyes went wide. "Cora, no, you don't. He's a wild man. He'll shoot you on sight. He doesn't take in strays."
"He doesn't like Jed Price,"
Cora said, the words tasting strange in her own mouth. A cold, hard kernel of a plan was forming. It was not a hunch. It was a calculation. An outcast, a man who had lost everything, a man who lived where no one else dared to go.
"He is the only man in this town who is not afraid of Jed Price,"
Cora stated.
"And he is the only man Jed Price is afraid of."
"He'll kill you, girl."
"The cold will kill me.
Jed Price will kill me," Cora said, her voice suddenly steady. "I'll take my chances with the ghost." She went upstairs. She packed her valise. She put on her warmest cloak and pulled her bonnet tight. May argued with her all the way to the stable out back, where she'd been tending the horses for a bit of extra pay. May finally grabbed her arm.
It's snowing. Cora, hard. You won't even find the trail. Which way?
Cora asked, slinging her valise over the back of a sway-backed gelding she'd been feeding. May sighed, defeated. She pointed north, past the edge of the dying town.
Follow the creek up into the high rocks. Keep the mountain on your left. God help you, girl. You're a fool. I've been a fool before,
Cora said. She mounted the horse, her skirts heavy and awkward.
Thank you for the stew. May.
She kicked the horse, and it moved out of the stable, into the blackness of the alley, and toward the edge of town. The storm hit her as soon as she cleared the last building. It was no longer just wind. It was a wall of white. The snow was thick and wet, stinging her face, blinding her. The horse stumbled, unsure, but Cora urged it on, leaning low against its neck, following the sound of the creek May had mentioned. It took hours, or maybe it was just one. Time ceased to have meaning. There was only the cold, a deep, penetrating chill that went past her skin and into her marrow. Her cloak was soaked. Her feet were numb. She was lost. She knew it. The creek was just a whisper under the howl of the wind. She was about to give up, to simply slide off the horse and let the white dark take her, when the horse stopped, lifting its head and nickering softly. Cora squinted through the swirling snow. There, tucked into a fold of rocks, half swallowed by the pines, was a shape. A low roof, a thin, gray wisp of smoke fighting the wind. A cabin. She slid off the horse, her legs buckling. She grabbed the valise and stumbled, falling to her knees in the deep drift, dragging herself the last 20 yards to the door. It was a low, heavy plank door with no window. She raised her fist, her glove frozen stiff, and knocked. Once, twice. The sound was swallowed by the storm. She knocked again, harder, using the last of her strength. A noise from within, a bar being lifted. The door cracked open. He stood in the gap, a silhouette against the dim firelight within. The rifle was in his hands, leveled at her chest, steady as the rock around them. It was him, Eli Thatcher. His gray eyes swept over her, taking in her frozen cloak, her ice-caked bonnet, her blue lips. He showed no surprise, no pity, nothing. He just looked, waiting. Cora could not feel her face. She could not muster a plea, or a lie, or a polite introduction. She was done. She leaned her forehead against the rough wood of the doorframe, the rifle still pointed at her heart. "You don't need to like me," she whispered, her voice a frozen rattle. "Just don't let me die." For a long moment, Eli Thatcher did not move. The rifle barrel remained level, pointed at her throat. The only sound was her own ragged breath, turning to ice in the air, and the high, thin scream of the wind over the roof. He stood in the gap, a man made of shadow and rock. She saw the pale gray of his eyes, and they were as cold as the storm she had fled. He was looking at her, but she felt he was seeing something else. A ghost, a memory, a threat. Cora leaned her weight against the door jamb. She had nothing left, no strength, no pride. Then he lowered the rifle, just an inch. He stepped back, a single, reluctant movement, pulling the heavy door wider. It was not an invitation. It was an admission. She stumbled past him, dragging her valise, which felt impossibly heavy. She almost fell onto the hard-packed dirt floor. The sudden shift from the howling white dark to the dim interior made her blind for a moment. The cabin was small. One room, a low loft, and a stone hearth. A fire burned, but it was a miserly fire. Just a few logs banked low, giving off more smoke than heat. The air inside was cold, sharp with the scent of pine, old ashes, and cured hides. A bedroll was laid out near the fire, a single chair, a rough-hewn table. It was the room of a man who was not living, only surviving. Eli shut the door. The sound was heavy, final. The bar dropped back into its bracket with a solid, wooden thud.
The storm was suddenly muffled. A distant roar. The silence inside the cabin was worse. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. Cora stood dripping by the door, her hands numb, her cloak a sheet of frozen wool. He stood by the hearth, watching her. He did not ask her to sit. He did not offer to take her coat. "You're freezing," he said. It was not an observation of care. It was a fact. Cora fumbled with the clasp at her throat. Her fingers were useless, like wooden sticks. She could not unhook it. She gave a small, frustrated sob, her body beginning to shake violently as the small warmth of the cabin began to thaw her. He watched her fight the clasp for a long, hard second. A muscle worked in his jaw. He moved toward her, and she flinched, pulling back against the door. His face darkened, but he reached out, his movements quick and impersonal. His fingers, rough and calloused, brushed her skin as he undid the hook. It was done in an instant. He took the frozen cloak from her shoulders. It was stiff as a board. He held it for a moment, letting it drip onto the floor, then hung it on a peg near the fire, where it began to hiss and steam. "Sit," he said, gesturing with his chin toward the chair. Cora obeyed, her knees buckling. She sat, her hands in her lap, her soaked bonnet still tied to her head. Eli turned back to the fire. He added a single, larger log, pushing it into the embers with his boot. He picked up the rifle, checked its load, and leaned it against the stone of the hearth, within easy reach. Then he went to a shelf, took down a tin mug and a bottle, and poured 2 inches of whiskey. He pushed the mug across the table toward her. "Drink it." It was a command. Cora's upbringing screamed at her, but she looked at the amber liquid, then at his impassive face. She picked it up. The whiskey was liquid fire. It burned a raw path down her throat, into her chest, and hit her stomach with a jolt that made her gasp. But a second later, a dull, spreading warmth followed. The shaking in her hands lessened. He did not pour one for himself. He took a dipper of water from a bucket by the door and drank that. "The loft," he said, pointing up. "There's blankets. Stay out of the damp." He did not offer her his bedroll by the fire. She was the intruder. He was giving her the floor, the cold space above. "Thank you," she whispered. He just grunted, turning his back to her, and stared into the fire. Cora picked up her valise. The ladder to the loft was just rungs nailed to the wall. She climbed, her limbs aching. The loft was low, just a storage space under the eaves. It was cold, the wind finding its way through the chinks in the roof shingles. In one corner, there was a stack of folded, heavy wool blankets. They smelled of dust and cedar. She did not undress. She could not. Her clothes were damp and cold. She simply took off her wet boots, pulled 3 of the blankets over her, and curled into a tight ball, her valise for a pillow. She lay there, listening. She heard the storm. She heard the pop and crackle of the fire, and she heard the silence of the man below, who did not move, did not cough, did not pace. He just sat, a dark shape by the low fire, awake and watching. Cora did not sleep. She drifted in a cold, painful half-consciousness, the whiskey and her exhaustion warring with the fear and the strangeness of the small, tense space. When the gray light of morning finally filtered through the cabin's single, grease-papered window, she was already awake. The storm had not stopped. It had worsened. The wind howled, and the snow was a solid, drifting wall outside the small window. She looked down from the loft. Eli was gone. His bedroll was gone. The rifle was gone. Panic seized her. Had he left her? Left her to die, to starve, in this cabin? She scrambled down the ladder. Her cloak, now dry, was still on its peg. Her boots were by the hearth. The cabin was empty. Then she heard it. A sound from outside, near the door. The thud of an axe. Thwack! 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 He was outside, in the blizzard, chopping wood. Cora pulled on her boots. The fire was nearly dead. The water bucket was almost empty. The small cabin felt colder than it had last night. She was a burden. She was another mouth, another body consuming his heat, his wood. She knew, with a certainty born of hard experience, that to be a burden was to be disposable. When he returned, kicking snow from his boots, his hat and shoulders white, she was standing by the hearth. She had found the kindling box and was coaxing the embers back to life. He stopped, his arms full of fresh split pine, and watched her. "I can work," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She did not look at him. I will not be idle. I can cook, I can clean, I can mend." She looked up at him then, her eyes meeting his. "I learned in service. After my family, I know how to work." Eli's expression did not change. He dropped the wood into the wood box with a crash. "There ain't much to cook. Beans, salt pork, flour, coffee." "I can make that stretch," she said. He stared at her for another long moment. "The storm set in. You won't be leaving, not for a week, maybe more." "I will earn my keep for that week," she said. He grunted. "Water bucket's low. Spring's 20 yards past the shed. Don't get lost." He took his rifle, went to the chair, and began to clean it, his back to her. It was a dismissal. Cora found a heavy shawl in her valise. She took the water bucket and opened the door. The wind tore it from her hand, slamming it against the cabin. The cold was a living thing, a wolf that bit at her face. She fought her way to the small, snow-shrouded shed, found the path he had already shoveled, and followed it to a dark pool of water bubbling up from the ground. She broke the ice at its edge, filled the bucket, and fought her way back, her skirts frozen stiff, her hands burning. When she returned, he was still cleaning the gun. She filled the kettle and set it on the fire. She found the sack of flour, the tin of lard, the salt. She washed her hands in a basin of icy water, ignoring the pain, and began to make biscuits. For 3 days, they lived in that small, tight space, orbiting each other like two wary planets. The storm raged. The silence inside was as deep as the snow outside. They did not speak of the town. They did not speak of Jed Price. They did not speak of why she had come. They spoke only of practical things. Wood's low. Kettle's hot. The winds shifted. On the second day, she proved herself. He had a stack of his mending, a shirt ripped at the shoulder, wool socks worn through at the heel. She sat in the single chair. He had given it to her, choosing the floor for himself, and with her small sewing kit from her valise, she began to repair them. Her stitches were tiny, even, and strong. She did not patch the shirt. She wove the fabric back together, a skill she had spent years perfecting. He watched her hands as she worked. He said nothing, but when she was finished, he took the shirt and looked at the repair, his fingers tracing the neat line of her work. On the third day, she cooked. He had been living on salt pork fried in its own grease and beans boiled to mush. She took the salt pork and boiled it first to draw off the worst of the salt, then diced it and fried it with a handful of dried onions she found in a sack. She made a gravy with the flour and drippings. Her biscuits were light. He ate 3 of them, sopping up the gravy. It was the first time she had seen an expression on his face that was not grimness or suspicion. It was, for a second, simple satisfaction. The storm broke on the 4th day. The world outside was a blinding, silent white. "You can go now," he said that morning, his voice flat. He was staring out the window, his rifle in his hand. "The pass will be clear by afternoon." Cora was washing the tin plates from their breakfast, her hands stilled in the greasy water. "Go where, Mr. Thatcher?" "Back to Maze, back to town." "The men who came for me, they'll be back," she said. "Jed Price won't forget what you did." "That ain't your concern. It ain't mine, neither. I want my cabin back." Cora dried her hands. "I told you, I will not be a burden. The roof in the loft, it's leaking. The snow's melting through. It dripped on me all night."
He scowled. "It's a leak."
"It's a leak that will rot your roof beam," she said, her voice sharp. "I can fix it. I need mud and pine pitch, if you have it, and a ladder."
He looked at her, truly looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time, this small, pale woman in a worn dress, demanding to fix his roof. "I ain't got a ladder," he said. "Then I'll climb," she said. She found the bucket of pine tar he kept for his boots. She mixed it with clay mud from the spring bank, her hands submerged in the icy sludge. He watched, his arms crossed, his face a mask of disbelief. She climbed the outer wall, using the jutting logs as handholds, and hauled herself onto the low, snow-covered roof. She found the loose shingles and, with her bare hands, packed the sticky, cold mixture into the gaps, smearing it flat. Her hands were caked, her fingernails broken, the skin raw. The cold was brutal, but she did not stop until the patch was sealed. When she climbed back down, shaking, her hands blue, he was standing there. He was holding a clean rag and a tin of grease. He said nothing. He just pushed them at her. She spent an hour by the fire, slowly, painfully scrubbing the tar from her skin. He did not tell her to leave again. That afternoon, she went to the loft to reorder the blankets, now that they would not be dripped on. In the darkest corner, under a pile of moth-eaten hides, she saw the edge of a small, wooden chest. Curious, she pulled it out. It was not locked. She opened the lid. The smell that rose up was of ash, pure, cold ash. Inside, there was not much, a small, leather-bound book, its cover warped by heat and water, its pages fused, a bundle of letters, tied with a ribbon that was now just a brittle, black crisp. She could see the edges of the paper, feathery with soot, and at the bottom, a tintype in a scorched velvet frame. It was a photograph of a smiling young woman, but the heat had warped the metal, blistering the image, melting the face into a ghostly, unrecognizable blur. Cora's throat tightened. This was his past. This was the fire May had spoken of. She felt suddenly like a trespasser, a ghoul. She gently touched the edge of the burned book. "Get away from that." His voice was not loud. It was a low, guttural growl, more animal than human. Cora froze. She turned. He was standing at the foot of the ladder, his face pale, his gray eyes blazing with a light she had not seen before. It was not anger. It was pure, bottomless pain. She slowly, carefully, closed the lid of the chest. She did not look at him. She pushed it back into the corner, exactly as she had found it, and covered it with the hides. She did not ask. He did not offer. She climbed down the ladder, past him. Her head bowed. She went to the water bucket, washed her hands, and began preparing their supper. Her movements stiff. The silence in the cabin was no longer just quiet. It was breakable. It was dangerous. 2 days later, the sound of horses came. It was late afternoon. Eli was splitting wood. Cora was inside, kneading dough. She heard the horses first, the jingle of harnesses, the wet suck of hooves in the melting snow. It was more than one. Eli burst through the door, his face grim. "Loft," he snapped. "Now, and stay down." He grabbed his rifle from the hearth. He did not go to the window. He stood beside it, his body flattened against the log wall, listening. "Thatcher!" a voice roared from outside. It was Jed Price. "We know she's in there. Thatcher, send out the saloon witch." Cora, frozen at the loft ladder, watched Eli's face. It was carved from ice. "She killed Walter," another man yelled. "She bewitched him and killed him for his money." "So, we're coming in. Thatcher!" Jed shouted. "Last chance. Send her out, or we'll burn you out, same as your kin." That was the line. Eli's body went rigid.
He moved to the center of the room. "She ain't here, Price," he called out, his voice a calm, deadly promise. "Liar," Jed bellowed. "We know she run here. Send her out." "This is my land," Eli said. He walked to the door and eased the heavy bar from its bracket. "You ain't welcome on it." He opened the door and stepped onto the small porch, the rifle held loose in one hand, pointed at the ground. Cora crept to the window, peering through a small crack in the paper. There were 4 of them. Jed Price was in front, on a big bay. The other 3 were men she recognized from the saloon. Ranch hands. Drunk and mean. "Just give her to us. Thatcher," Jed said, trying to sound reasonable, though his face was red with drink. "It's town justice. She's a jinx. She brought death here." One of the other men, a skinny man with a pockmarked face, spat. "She's a ruined woman. Jed looked at me in the saloon. She did. A man can tell. She's no better than a whore. She probably tempted Walter, and when he wouldn't marry her, she—" Eli was moving. He had dropped the rifle. He walked off the porch, his steps even, deliberate. He walked right up to the skinny man's horse. The man stopped talking, his eyes wide. "Get down," Eli said. "What?" the man stammered. Eli grabbed the man's ankle and his belt and pulled. The man yelped as he was dragged from the saddle, landing hard in the slushy snow. Eli stood over him. "You don't talk about her." He drew back his fist and hit the man in the face. It was not a saloon brawl. It was a single, brutal, breaking sound. The man's head snapped back, and he lay still. Jed Price and the other 2 stared, their hands moving toward their guns. Eli did not look at them. He walked back to his porch, picked up his rifle, and raised it. He did not aim at any of them. He aimed at the stump 10 feet in front of Jed's horse. He fired. The shot was deafening in the cold air. A piece of wood the size of a fist exploded from the stump. "The next one goes in your horse." "Jed," Eli said, his voice quiet. "The one after that goes in you. I buried my family on this land. I ain't against adding a few trespassers. Get off it." Jed Price's face was a mixture of fury and fear. He looked at the smoking rifle. He looked at the man on the ground, who was groaning, blood pouring from his nose. He looked at the cold, empty eyes of Eli Thatcher. "This ain't over," Jed snarled. "It is for today," Eli said. Jed yanked his horse's head around. "Get him!" He spat at his men. They scrambled to pull their friend up. Draping him over his saddle, they rode away, fast, back down the trail to town. Eli watched them until they were gone. He stood on the porch for a long time. Then he came back inside, barred the door, and leaned his rifle by the hearth. He went to the water basin and washed the blood from his knuckles. It was not his blood. Cora came down from the loft, her legs shaking so badly she almost fell. He did not look at her. He was angry. She could feel it. It was a cold, simmering rage that filled the small cabin, hotter and more dangerous than the fire. "You should have let them," she whispered, her voice cracking. He stopped washing his hands. He turned to her, his face dark. "What?" "You should have stayed inside," she said, the words tumbling out, bitter and fast. "You should have let them take me. It would be done. I would be done. I'm tired. I'm so tired of being this problem, this thing that men fight over." "Shut up," he said, his voice low. "I'm not worth this," she cried, tears of shame and anger finally breaking free. "I'm not worth you getting shot or them coming back to burn you. You should have just let me die in the storm." He crossed the space between them in 2 strides. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip like iron. He was not the man from the saloon. This was different. This was raw. "You think this was about you?" he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You think I care about Jed Price or his drunken friends?" "Then why?" she wept. "Because I'm tired of watching," he roared, the word exploding out of him, a lifetime of suppressed pain. "I'm tired of watching them burn.
I'm tired of men who call themselves law or justice, who take what they want and destroy what's clean. I watched them ride up to my home. I watched the smoke. I did nothing. I ran. He shook her, his eyes wild. I am tired of watching innocents burn. His words hung in the air. He was breathing hard, his whole body shaking with the force of his confession. She was not looking at a ghost. She was looking at a man, broken and raw, and in his eyes, she saw the same thing she felt in her own heart, the same shame, the same loneliness. The fight drained out of both of them, leaving a dead, aching silence. His hands were still on her shoulders, but his grip had loosened. He was just holding on now. She could feel the heat of his body. She could smell the smoke and the cold pine on his skin. He was staring at her, but his eyes were seeing the past. She lifted a trembling hand and laid it on his chest, over his heart. She could feel it pounding like a drum.
Eli,
she whispered. His gaze focused. He looked at her, truly seeing her, seeing the tears on her face, the desperation in her eyes. He leaned down. She rose on her toes. It was not a kiss. It was a collision. It was hesitant for only a second, a bare brush of his chapped lips against hers. And then it was desperate. It was hungry. It was the taste of smoke and whiskey, and loneliness so deep it had no bottom. His arms wrapped around her, crushing her to him, one hand tangling in her hair, pulling her bonnet free. Her arms went around his neck, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was tilting. It was a kiss of shared ruin. It was the heat they had both been craving, the raw, aching need to feel something, anything, other than the cold. It lasted for a minute, or an eternity. Then, just as suddenly, he tore himself away. He pushed her back, stumbling away from her as if she had burned him. He looked at his hands, then at her, his face a mask of horror and shame. "No," he muttered. He backed away, grabbing his coat from the peg.
Eli,
she said, reaching for him. "Don't," he choked out. He looked at her, his eyes full of a terrible self-loathing. You don't want what I am." He fumbled for the bar, threw the door open, and retreated, escaping into the freezing dark of the night. Cora was left standing in the middle of the room, her hand outstretched, her lips stinging. The cold night air poured into the cabin, but she did not feel it. She was alone, by the fire, trembling. He did not come back inside for almost an hour. Cora stood where he had left her, her body trembling, her lips still burning from the desperate, angry kiss. The cold air from the open door swirled around her ankles, chilling the room, but she did not move to close it. She felt frozen, suspended between the raw heat of the moment and the icy reality of his rejection. When he finally appeared, he was a man encased in ice. Snow clung to his shoulders and hat, and his face was shut tight, the lines around his mouth deeper than before. He walked past her without a word, slammed the door, and dropped the bar. He went to his bedroll, added a log to the fire, and sat with his back to her, a solid wall of denial. The message was clear. It had not happened. It would not happen again. The snow began to fall that night, thick and heavy. It did not stop for 3 days. It fell in a suffocating, silent curtain, sealing the cabin, burying the world, and trapping them inside. The small room, which had become tense, now felt impossibly small, charged with unspoken words. They moved around each other with a careful, quiet choreography. He would rise first, in the dark, and go out to check his traps or shovel a path. She would rise in the gray light, make coffee, and start on the biscuits. He would chop wood. She would clean. They rationed their speech, using words only for necessity. "The water's low. I'll go. Wood box needs filling."
I see it.
The silence was a third person in the cabin,
a heavy, cold guest who sat between them at the small table. Cora felt his shame. It was a bitter, metallic taste in the air. He was ashamed of his weakness, of the confession he had roared at her, of the kiss he had started and then fled. She wanted to tell him it was all right, that she was not afraid of him, or of what he felt, but she did not know the words. She, too, had been shamed for wanting, for feeling. She knew the sting of that particular brand, so she said nothing. She found his shirt, the one he had worn when he'd faced Jed Price. It was torn at the shoulder, where one of the men had grabbed him, and snagged on a nail by the door where he had thrown it. It was a map of the violence he had done on her behalf. That night, while he was outside in the blowing snow, tending the horse, she took the shirt. She sat by the fire, her mending kit in her lap. The lamp oil was low, so she worked by the flickering light of the flames. Her hands were steady. She pulled the torn fabric together, her needle dipping in and out, the tiny, even stitches a quiet act of repair. She was mending the cloth, but she was thinking of the man. She was smoothing the jagged edges, trying to close a wound he refused to acknowledge. When she was done, the tear was gone, replaced by a neat, strong seam. She folded the shirt and left it on the foot of his bedroll. When he came back in, shaking snow from his coat, he saw it. He stopped. He looked at the mended shirt, then at her. Cora was back at the table, scrubbing dried beans in a bowl, her head bowed, her hair hiding her face. He picked up the shirt, his rough fingers tracing the line of her stitches. He said nothing, but he did not put the shirt on. He folded it again, carefully, and put it away in his pack. The silence that night was a little warmer. They were running low on meat. The storm had not let up, but it had thinned, and Eli was restless. He could not abide being trapped, and their supplies were dwindling. "Stay inside," he commanded, pulling his rifle from the rack. "Keep the door barred. Don't open it, for anyone." "You shouldn't go," she said, looking at the white world outside. "The snow is too deep." "We need meat." He said it was final. He left, and the silence he left behind was worse. It was empty. Cora waited. She cleaned the cabin until it was spotless. She reorganized the shelves. She paced. The gray light of morning turned into the flat, white glare of noon. Noon bled into the deep blue shadows of afternoon. He did not return. A knot of fear, cold and tight, formed in her stomach. She pictured him lying in the snow, his leg broken. She pictured Jed Price, waiting for him. She pictured the 100 ways a man could die alone in these mountains. Just as the sun began to dip, sending weak, watery light across the snow, she heard him. He stumbled through the door, a dark shape against the snow, and fell to his knees. A single limp rabbit fell from his hand. "Eli!" He was clutching his shoulder, his face pale and slick with sweat, his teeth gritted. His coat was dark and wet, and it was not just from melted snow. "Fell!" he gasped, his voice tight. "The ridge! The gun!" She was at his side in an instant, her fear replaced by a cold, sharp purpose. She helped him up, her shoulder under his good arm, and guided him to the chair. He slumped into it, his breathing ragged. "The kettle is hot," she said, her voice even, the way it had been when she'd served in the house back east, when a crisis demanded calm. "Let me see. Take the coat off." He tried to shrug out of the heavy sheepskin, but a sharp, terrible sound, half groan, half hiss, escaped his lips, and he fell back. "Can't. Arm. Won't move." "Stay still." She went to her valise and took out her sewing shears. She did not hesitate. She cut the heavy sleeve of his coat, peeling it away. His wool shirt underneath was a ruin, soaked and black with blood. "This, too," she said. "Cora," he began, a protest born of pride. "Be still, Eli." She cut the shirt from his body, the blade snipping through the wet, sticky wool.
He winced as she peeled the fabric away from his skin, but he did not make another sound. The wound was long and ragged, a deep tear across his collarbone and shoulder. It looked like the bullet had just grazed him, tearing the flesh open, but it was deep, and it was bleeding. "It needs stitching," she said, her voice flat. She moved to get the hot water and rags, and as she turned, she saw his back. She stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. His back was a landscape of old pain. Long, white, puckered lines crisscrossed his skin, the unmistakable mark of a whip. But worse, on his left shoulder blade, was a wide, melted patch of skin, slick and unnatural, the terrible, permanent signature of a fire. This was the man who had flinched when she touched him, the man who sat with his back to the wall, the man who had roared at her about watching things burn. He knew she was looking. His entire body was rigid, a statue of shame. "Get on with it," he said, his voice a low growl. Cora did not speak. She turned back, her face unreadable. She dipped a rag in the steaming water, wrung it out, and pressed it to the new wound. He hissed, his good hand gripping the arm of the chair until his knuckles were white. But he did not pull away. Her touch was not the clinical touch of a nurse. It was not the hurried touch of a rescuer. It was impossibly gentle. She cleaned the gash, her fingers careful, as if she were tending to something sacred. He had built a wall of ice and rock around himself, and she had just seen the terrible, fragile thing he was protecting. She threaded her smallest mending needle with strong, dark thread. "This will hurt," she whispered. "It's not the first time," he bit out. She stitched the wound closed, her small, neat stitches, the same ones she had used on his shirt, pulled the raw edges of his skin together. He did not move, but she felt the tremors of pain that ran through him. When she was done, she bandaged it with strips torn from one of her own chemises. She helped him to his bedroll, and he sank onto it, his face pale and exhausted. He turned his back to her. She put a blanket over him, and he closed his eyes, retreating into a pained, fitful sleep. Cora sat in the chair, watching him. The firelight played over the terrible, pale map of his past. Later that night, he woke. The storm had picked up again, a high, mournful sound against the walls. He was not sleeping, just lying there, staring into the embers. Cora sat on the floor, her back against the hearth. The cabin was quiet, save for the wind. "The scars," she said, her voice so soft it was almost part of the wind. "From the fire." He did not move. She thought for a moment he would not answer. "Jed Price," he finally said, his voice rough. "He was right about one thing. I watched my kin burn." He was quiet for a long time. Cora waited. She did not prod. She just waited. "You saw the chest," he said. It was not a question. "I saw," she answered. "They held me," he whispered, the words torn from him. "The men they tied me to a post. The one with the whip. He said a man who lays with those people deserved to be taught." He flinched, a memory tensing his wounded shoulder. "He said I needed to remember. He put the torch to me himself, said I should carry the mark." The confession hung in the air, heavy and toxic. He had shown her the core of his shame. Cora felt a sudden, sharp, answering need, a need to show him he was not the only one, that his brand did not scare her. "I have scars, too," she said, her own voice trembling. "They're just not where you can see." He turned his head slightly, his eyes in shadow, questioning. She took a breath. "I was promised once, back east. His name was Arthur. His father owned the bank. He had soft hands and a soft voice. He promised me a life. He promised me everything. I was young. I was a fool. I believed him." Eli was still, watching her now. "When I told him I was with child, he stopped calling. His letters stopped."
Her voice went flat, recalling the memory. My father, he found out. He took me to Arthur's house. Arthur wouldn't even come to the door. His father did. He said I was a woman of low character, that I had tried to trap his son. My father, she continued, her eyes on the fire, seeing a different time, a different room. He didn't defend me. He believed them. He said I had ruined the family name, that I was a walking shame. He took me to a small house for women like me, and he left me there. The child. She didn't live. She came too early, a little girl. Cora's hand unconsciously went to her stomach. I held her for an hour. She was so cold. When I was well enough to walk, my father came back. He gave me $20 and told me to never come back. He said I had no family. That's when I answered Mr. Price's letter. I had nowhere else to go. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were dry, bright with a pain that was old and cold. That's when I learned what shame tasted like. That's when I learned what ruined meant. It's a brand they put on you, Eli, a hot iron, so everyone knows you're not worth protecting. She gave a small, bitter laugh. So you see, she said, her voice hardening with the defiance he had seen before. You can't scare me, and Jed Price can't scare me. I've already lived through hell. This is just snow. Her words settled between them. A perfect, terrible, shared understanding. They were the same, both branded, both outcasts, both survivors of a fire. He said nothing. He just looked at her, and for the first time the ice in his gray eyes was gone. In its place was a profound, aching recognition. He was seeing himself. The fire popped. The wind shrieked. The space between his bedroll and her place on the hearth felt like a canyon. After a long time, Cora shivered and made a move to climb to the cold, dark loft. Don't, he said. His voice was rough, cracked with pain. She stopped. It's cold up there, he said. Stay by the fire. It was not an invitation to his bed. It was just, don't go. She didn't go to the loft. She unlaced her boots and sat back down, pulling her shawl tighter. Hours seemed to pass. The fire burned low, and the cold of the cabin floor began to seep into her bones. She shivered, wrapping her arms around her knees. From his bedroll, he grunted. With his good arm, he pushed one of his heavy wool blankets toward her. It landed in a heap on the floor between them. She took it, wrapping it around her shoulders. The wool held the faint, smoky scent of him. Neither of them slept. They just existed in the quiet dark. Two wounded animals resting near the same fire. Finally, she could not stand the pretense. She looked at him, in the dying light of the embers. She could see he was looking at her. No words. She rose from the floor. She walked the few steps to his bedroll and lay down on the floor beside it, pulling the blanket over her. He turned onto his side, facing her. The movement pained his shoulder, and he winced. He reached out his good hand. It was not a grab. It was not a plea. It was just an offering, palm up, in the small space between them. She put her hand in his. His skin was rough, calloused, and blessedly warm. Her hand was small, scarred from lie and work. He closed his fingers around hers and pulled, just gently. Cora moved the last few inches, sliding from the cold floor and into the bedroll with him. It was desperate. It was quiet. It was not romance. It was survival. His arm, his good arm, came around her, pulling her against his chest. She rested her head on his uninjured shoulder, her hand flat against his heart, feeling it beat, strong and steady. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in. There were no words. There was only the howl of the storm against the walls, and the sound of skin warming skin, and the first, fragile, unspoken peace either of them had known in years. In the gray light of morning, Cora woke first. She was tangled with him, his good arm still draped protectively over her.
his breathing deep and even. His face, in sleep, was younger. The harsh lines eased. She felt warm. She felt, for the first time, safe. He woke as she stirred, his eyes opening, clear and alert. He did not let her go. He just looked at her. The cabin was quiet. The storm had passed. "Cora," he said. It was the first time he had used her name. It sounded different in his voice. Solid. "Eli," she answered. They were different. The air in the cabin had changed. It was no longer tense. It was still, softer, closer. But the quiet was fragile. The world was still outside. He sat up, hissing as his shoulder protested. She helped him, her touch easy, familiar. As she made coffee, he finally told her the rest. "It was a couple," he said, staring into the new fire she had built. "A trapper, name of Silas. His wife, she was Shoshone. A good woman, quiet, kind." He paused, gathering the words. "My father took them in, the town, men from the valley. They didn't like it, said it was unnatural, said it was against God. They came, a posse. They called themselves regulators. Said they were cleansing the valley for decent folk." Cora stopped, the coffee pot in her hand. "My PA, he met them on the porch, told them to leave his land. Said a man's house was his own, and he'd shelter who he pleased. That was the law for him. The real law." Eli's voice went flat. "Dead." "They shot him, on the porch. Shot my brother when he ran out. My wife, Sarah, she was... They... And then they brought the torches. I was in the barn, tending a sick calf. They found me. They dragged me out. They tied me to the porch post to make me watch. A lesson. They said..." He touched the old, puckered skin on his shoulder. "I was the only one they left alive. A message. I ran. I couldn't be around people after that. I felt cursed, like I carried the fire with me. I came back here because it's the only land I've got. I left the town alone, to keep them safe. From me, from the men who would come back to finish the job." Cora closed her eyes. "You're tired of watching innocents burn?" she whispered, understanding him completely. "I am," he said. A hard, sudden knock echoed through the cabin. Eli was on his feet in an instant, the spell broken. He grabbed his rifle, his face instantly reverting to the cold mask of the man he had been. He moved to the side of the door. "Who is it?" "Man with a letter," a voice called, muffled by the wood. "From town, for a Cora Bellamy." Eli and Cora looked at each other. Not Jed. A letter. Eli eased the bar back, opening the door a crack, his rifle ready. A grizzled man in heavy furs stood there, his horse breathing steam in the cold air. "You Bellamy?" he asked Cora. "Sheriff Brody gave me 2 bits to ride this up. Said it's urgent." Cora took the folded, damp paper. Her hands were shaking. She opened it. He says they found new evidence," she read, her voice thin. They searched my valise at Mays. They found a brooch. Walter Price's mother's. He says Walter's cousin confessed. He saw me take it the morning I arrived." "It's a lie," she whispered, looking at Eli, her blood turning to ice. "I never saw a brooch. My valise. I've had it with me." "No," Eli said, his voice flat. "Your valise was at Mays. When you were working, Jed Price, he had someone plant it." "He's summoning me back," Cora said, her voice shaking. "To Bitter Creek, for a hearing." "It's a hanging," Eli said, his voice a low, deadly growl. He took the paper from her hand and crumpled it. "He couldn't get you with force, so he's using the law. You're not going." "I have to." "No." He grabbed her arm, his good arm strong. "We ride south. Tonight. We can be in Colorado territory in 3 days. They will never find us." Cora looked at him, at this man who had shared his hell with her, at the cabin that had been her sanctuary. She thought of running, of disappearing with him. Then she thought of the brand. Ruined. Thief.
"No," she said, her voice small, but hard as iron. "I won't run anymore. Eli, I ran from my family. I ran from my past. I came here, and I've been running from this town. If I run now, I'll be running for the rest of my life. They branded me. I won't let it stick."
Cora, this isn't a trial. It's a trap. They just want a rope. They will not listen to you. Then they'll have to hang me while I'm looking them in the eye.
She said, "I have to face it. I won't let them call me a thief."
He stared at her, seeing the steel that had gotten her up his mountain in a blizzard, the same steel that had made her patch his roof. He hated it. Every part of him screamed to protect her, to hide her, to burn the town down himself. But he nodded, his jaw tight. "Then I'm going with you," he said. She put her hand on his chest, over his heart. "No, not yet. If you walk in with that rifle, it's not a trial. It's a war. It's just you, against them. They'll say you're forcing them. That's what it is anyway."
"Please," she begged. "I have to do this. I have to walk in there alone. As Cora Bellamy, not as the woman you're protecting. As me, I have to stand on my own. Just let me try."
He fought a war inside himself. He wanted to lock her in the cabin and ride down himself, but he looked at her face, and he saw a woman he didn't just desire or want to protect. He respected her. "They will tear you apart," he whispered.
"They've already tried,"
she said. He saddled the gelding for her. He stood by the horse's head in the bright, cold snow, the mountains looming over them. She put on her cloak and tied her bonnet. She put her foot in the stirrup. "Cora," he said, his voice rough. He put his hand on her arm. "If you're not back by sundown, I'm coming, and I'm burning that town to the ground."
"I'll be back," she said.
She turned the horse and kicked it gently. She rode away, down the slick, sun-dazzled trail. Eli stood and watched her, a solitary figure in the snow, until she disappeared into the pines. A small, lone woman riding back into the world that had tried to destroy her. The ride down from the high country was cold, but the sun was bright, shining with a false, wintry promise. It made the snow-covered valley glitter, a beautiful, sharp-toothed trap. Cora rode with her back straight, her hands clutching the reins, her knuckles white. She did not look back at the mountain where Eli stood watching. She could feel his gaze on her, a physical weight, all the way down the trail. Bitter Creek was just as she had left it, a single, muddy street thawing in the midday sun, sending up a smell of wet earth and livestock. But this time, the stares were not just curious, they were hostile. As she rode past the mercantile, the women who had whispered before now stood silent, their arms crossed, their face hard with judgment. Men stopped their work at the livery in the smithy to watch her pass. Their eyes were cold. She was no longer a mystery, a piece of bad luck. She was a criminal. She dismounted in front of the gilded cage, her legs trembling so badly she nearly fell. She tied the gelding to the rail. For a second, she stood there, her hand on the horse's neck, drawing strength from its simple, animal warmth. She thought of Eli's words, "If you're not back by sundown." She took a breath, straightened her bonnet, and pushed through the bat-wing doors. The saloon was packed. It was not yet noon, but every chair was filled. It was not a drinking crowd. It was a hunting crowd. They were all there, the men from the posse, the women from the street, the storekeep, the blacksmith. They sat in judgment, a sea of unfriendly faces. At the front of the room, where the small stage for the piano usually stood, a long table had been set. Sheriff Brody sat in the middle, his tin star polished for the occasion, his face looking uncomfortable and self-important all at once. To his right sat Jed Price. He was clean-shaven, wearing a black suit, his face a mask of false grief. May was there, standing at the far end of the bar, her arms crossed. She met Cora's eyes and gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of her head.
Don't do this!
Augie was behind the bar, polishing the same glass over and over, his eyes on the floor. The room went dead silent when Cora walked in. Every head turned. "Miss Bellamy," Sheriff Brody said, his voice trying for official sounding. "You got my summons. Good. We're here to hold a public hearing, to get to the bottom of the matter of Walter Price's death."
This is not a court,
Cora said, her voice small but clear in the heavy silence. "It's town justice." Jed Price boomed, standing up. He pointed a thick finger at her. "Which is more than you deserve. You woman, you came here, and my cousin is dead." "Sit down, Jed," Brody muttered, waving him back into his chair. "We'll do this proper. Now, miss, we have evidence. Evidence that you weren't just a bad luck charm, but a thief, and maybe worse." Brody reached under the table and produced a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. He unwrapped it dramatically, for the crowd. On the table, he placed a silver brooch, tarnished with age, set with small blue stones. "This," Brody announced, "was Walter's mother's. He kept it in his cash box. It was found by May, here, in your valise, which you left behind when you fled." Cora looked at May. May's face was pale. "Brody, I told you." "You told me you found it in her things." Brody cut her off, his voice sharp, warning her.
"I found it,"
May said, her voice tight.
"After Jed, here, had already been in the room looking for his cousin's belongings.
I found it right on top of her folded chemise, where a person planting it would put it." A murmur went through the crowd. Jed Price jumped to his feet. "She's lying. She's a saloon madam. She's in on it with her—" "Sit down, Price," Brody yelled. He turned his glare on Cora. "It was in your bag. That's a fact."
"I never saw it before in my life,"
Cora said. She looked at the brooch. It was ugly, and it was the thing that was going to hang her.
"She's lying,"
a woman shrieked from the back.
"A harlot. That's what she is, living up on the mountain with that Thatcher creature. She's bewitched him, too."
"And that ain't all," Brody said, silencing the crowd. He nodded at Jed. Jed stood. He put his hand over his heart. I didn't want to say nothing. Walter was my kin. I was protecting his memory." He took a shaky breath. "But I have to confess what I saw. I have to speak the truth before God." He turned to the crowd, his voice full of feigned pain. "I saw her. I rode out to Walter's cabin that morning to see if he needed help meeting the stage. I was late. When I got there, I saw her, sneaking out the back. She had his rifle in one hand and his cash box in the other."
"Liar!"
Cora cried, her voice cracking.
"You liar! I never met him. I never saw his cabin."
"She's calling me a liar?" Jed roared, his face turning purple. "I saw you. You had blood on your dress. You ran off when you saw me. Ran into the trees like an animal. I went inside, and I found him. My cousin. Shot in the back. Cold." Jed Price buried his face in his hands and pretended to sob. It was over. Cora knew it. The crowd was a single, breathing animal, and it smelled blood. "Murderer!" a man shouted. "Hang her!" yelled another. "String her up!" The men in the front row stood up. The skinny, pockmarked man Eli had hit surged forward. "Let's finish this, Brody. We don't need no more talking."
"This is not justice!"
Cora screamed, backing away as the man lunged, grabbing her arm.
"I never met him. I never saw him. I only answered his letter because I was desperate. I had nowhere else to go."
Her defiance only enraged them. They saw it as proof. Her trembling was guilt. Her shouting was the cornered cry of a trapped animal.
"I had nowhere to go,"
she cried again.
tears of terror and rage streaming down her face.
"You'll have somewhere to go,"
the man snarled, dragging her toward the door.
"To hell!"
"Stop!" Brody yelled. But it was weak. He was not in control. The crowd surged, pushing tables over. A man near the door threw a rope over a high ceiling beam. "No!" Cora screamed, struggling, but her strength was nothing. The batwing doors exploded open. They didn't just swing. They were blasted from their hinges, one of them ripping free and crashing to the floor. Eli Thatcher stood in the doorway. He was not the man she had left. This was the ghost of the mountain. He wore his heavy sheepskin coat, and in his hands, he held his rifle. Not loosely, but at a low, ready angle. His hat was pulled low, and his pale gray eyes were not gray. They were black as coal, burning with a cold. Controlled fire. The saloon, which had been a roaring ocean of voices, went utterly, instantly silent. The only sound was the drip of melting snow from Eli's coat onto the floor. The man holding Cora's arm froze. He looked from Eli's rifle to his face, and slowly, his hand opened. Cora stumbled free.
Get out of here, Thatcher,"
Sheriff Brody stammered, his hand moving toward his own pistol.
"This is official town business."
Eli did not look at Brody. He looked at the rope hanging from the beam. He looked at Cora, her face stained with tears, her bonnet torn. Then his eyes settled on Jed Price. He took one step into the room, then another. The crowd parted for him, men stumbling back, falling over chairs to get out of his path. He walked until he was standing in the center of the room, just 10 feet from the table.
"You're a liar, Jed,"
Eli said. His voice was not loud. It was quiet, but it cut through the room like a honed blade, colder than the wind outside.
"You stay out of this, Thatcher,"
Jed blustered, though his face had gone pale. "She's a murderer. I saw her." "You saw an opportunity," Eli said. He turned, just his head, to look at Sheriff Brody. "You want evidence. Sheriff, you're so keen on evidence. Ask him. Ask Jed Price about the $200 he owed his cousin." Brody's mouth opened, then closed. "Ask him," Eli continued, his voice relentless. "About the IOUs Walter held. Ask him about the card game, 3 weeks back, where Walter told him he'd take his horse and his saddle if he didn't pay up."
That's got nothing to do with this,"
Jed spat. "It has everything to do with it," Eli said. He took another step. "Walter was a tight man, a hard man. He was going to ruin you, Jed, and you knew it. But if Walter died, with no wife, who gets his land? Sheriff." Brody looked at Jed. The whole room looked at Jed. "Who gets his cabin, and his cattle, and the IOUs he held?" Eli pressed. "His only kin. You."
"You're crazy,"
Jed shouted.
"He's crazy. He's as cursed as she is."
"You didn't just ride out to help Walter, Jed," Eli said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You rode out to stop him from marrying this woman, because if Walter had a wife, she'd get it all. You had to kill him before she arrived. But you were late, weren't you?" Eli looked at Cora. The stage was late. He killed his cousin, shot him in the back, and when he was ransacking the place to make it look like a robbery, this woman showed up in town, a gift from God, someone to put it all on, a stranger, a woman with no people, easy to blame.
"It's a lie,"
Jed screamed. He was cornered, and his fear was turning to rage.
"He's making it up. There's no proof." "There's proof enough,"
Eli said.
"The man who rode with you, Silas Croft. He's passed out drunk at the livery. Sheriff, bragging about how Jed here paid him $20 to keep his mouth shut about that morning."
Jed's face went white. He had overplayed his hand.
"You,"
Jed choked.
She bewitched you."
He lunged, but not at Eli. He lunged at Cora. He pulled his own pistol, grabbing her, yanking her in front of him as a shield. "I'll kill her. I'll kill her right now. Thatcher!" He pressed the gun to her head. Cora screamed. But Eli was faster. He had not moved his rifle. His hand had dropped to his hip. The sound of his draw was a single, metallic shing. His pistol was in his hand, cocked and steady, aimed not at Cora, but at the small space of Jed's forehead visible over her hair. "Go ahead," Eli said. His voice was dead calm. "Pull the trigger." The saloon was breathless. "You shoot her," Eli promised. "You'll be dead before she hits the floor, and I won't be the only one shooting. Right, May?" May, at the end of the bar, was holding a double-barreled shotgun, its twin muzzles aimed squarely at Jed's belly. Jed was shaking. He was trapped. He looked at Eli's cold, dead eyes. He looked at May's shotgun. He looked at the crowd, who were no longer on his side. They were just watching, terrified. "You dare them to hang her," Eli said to Brody, his pistol never wavering from Jed. "You put that rope on her. But I promise you, Sheriff, if she dies today, you'll need to bury 2 bodies, maybe more." Silence. Jed was panting, his own gun shaking against Cora's temple. "Let her go, Jed," Sheriff Brody said, his voice quiet, all the false authority gone. He had unholstered his own gun, but it was pointed at Jed. Jed looked around, his eyes wild. He saw no allies. No one moved to help him. She's free," Brody said, louder. He cleared his throat, trying to find his official voice. This new evidence, it changes things. This is a family matter. Jed Price, you're under arrest for threatening this woman. Put the gun down. Now." Jed's face crumpled. He was a bully, and his nerve was broken. His hand trembled, and he let the pistol fall from Cora's head. He shoved her away from him, and she fell to the floor. Eli did not move. He kept his gun on Jed as 2 men, emboldened by the sheriff, moved in and grabbed Jed's arms. "It ain't fair," Jed wept as they dragged him away. It was mine." Eli holstered his pistol. He walked to where Cora was kneeling on the floor, shaking. He did not offer his hand. He just stood over her, his rifle back in his grip. The crowd began to disperse, men shuffling out the door, ashamed, not meeting his eyes or hers. They wanted no more part of this. The show was over. "She's free to go," Brody muttered, his eyes on the floor. He would not look at Eli. Eli nodded. He looked at May. "My thanks." May nodded back, lowering the shotgun. "Get her out of here, Eli, before the wind changes again." Eli turned and walked out the broken doors. He did not look to see if Cora was following. He knew she would be. Cora scrambled to her feet. She gave one look back at May, a look of desperate, silent gratitude, and then she ran. She ran out of the saloon into the cold, clean air, to where Eli was already untying her horse. They left town in a bitter, echoing silence. He rode his horse, and she rode the gelding beside him. They did not speak. The sound of their horses' hooves in the melting snow was the only sound. They rode past the mercantile, past the wary, curtain-twitching windows, and up the trail, back toward the mountain. The sun was setting, staining the snow-covered peaks in shades of apricot and blood. The air grew sharp and cold. Eli did not ride all the way back to the cabin. He stopped in a small, sheltered grove of pines just below the ridgeline, where the trees were thick and broke the wind. He dismounted and, without a word, began to make a fire. Cora slid from her horse, her body numb. She stood by the animal, her hands tangled in its mane, and watched him. He moved with an efficient, angry grace, gathering dry wood, striking a flint, coaxing a small, bright flame to life. The fire caught, and the warmth began to push back the intense, high-country cold. Eli straightened up and looked at her. He had not spoken a word to her since they left the saloon. She had held it in. The fear, the shame, the humiliation of the trial, the cold, black muzzle of Jed's gun against her skin, the terror of the rope. Seeing him standing there, safe, the firelight catching the hard planes of his face, it all broke. A sob tore from her throat. A raw, ugly sound. It was not a ladylike weep. It was a storm. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking violently, and sank to her knees in the snow. She wept for Walter Price, for the child she had lost, for the father who had disowned her, for the town that wanted her dead. She wept for the sheer, crushing loneliness of her life. Eli was in front of her in an instant. He knelt in the snow, his own anger forgotten, his face stripped bare of everything but a raw, aching concern. He reached for her, his hands hesitant, as if he were afraid he might break her. Then he pulled her against him. He pulled her hard against his chest, his arms wrapping around her, his hand coming up to cradle the back of her head, pressing her face into the rough wool of his coat. "It's all right," he whispered, his voice rough. "You're safe. It's done." They hate me," she choked out, her words muffled against his shoulder. They were going to. I. Shh. He just held her. He held her like he had held her that night in the cabin. But this was different. This was not two people sharing a space. This was one person holding another. He rocked her gently, his hand stroking her hair. "I believe you, Cora," he whispered, his lips against her hair. "All of it. About your PA, about the baby. I believe you." She cried until she was empty, until there was nothing left but shudders. She sagged against him, and he took her weight. Finally, she pulled back, her face wet, her heart aching. She looked at him in the firelight. His eyes were not cold. They were full of the things he could not say. "You came," she whispered. "I said I would," he answered, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. She looked at this man, this scarred, haunted, violent man who had faced down a whole town for her, this man who had seen her brand, and who was not afraid. She put her cold, trembling hand on his jaw. He did not pull away. He leaned into her touch, his own hand covering hers, holding it there against his skin. "Eli," she said, and then she kissed him. It was not the desperate, angry collision in the cabin. It was not the chaste, grateful peck of a rescued woman. It was a kiss of profound, desperate, and absolute choice. It was a kiss that said, "You are mine, and I am yours, and the rest of the world is just snow." He kissed her back, his mouth answering hers, and it was a promise. It was fire in the cold. He pulled her closer, his lips moving from her mouth to her jaw, to the cold skin of her neck. She gasped, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. They were running from nothing now. They were running to each other. He lifted her, his good arm strong, and carried her the few feet to the bedroll he had spread by the fire. He laid her down gently, his eyes never leaving hers. "Cora," he said, his voice thick. "Stay," she whispered. Don't leave me. Not tonight." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. He lay down beside her, and in the shelter of the pines, under a sky cold with stars, they fell into each other. They came together with the desperate, quiet need of two souls who had been running from the shadows for too long, and had finally, in each other, found a place to rest. The winter deepened, locking the high country in a silence so profound it felt like the world had stopped. The snow piled in great, soft drifts against the cabin, burying the windows on the north side, insulating them from the screaming wind. Inside the small log walls, the world had shrunk to the space of a single room, a hearth, and two people. After the terror in town and the raw, desperate comfort they had taken in the woods, something between Eli and Cora had settled. The cabin was no longer a place of tension and silence. It was a shelter. It was, impossibly, a home. They survived on what they had. The work was hard and constant. Eli would leave in the gray light of pre-dawn, his wounded shoulder still stiff but mending,
to check the trap lines he had set. He would return with rabbits, or sometimes just the cold on his skin, but he always returned. Cora kept the fire, hauled the water from the spring, and made their meager supplies last. She learned to make stew from flour, water, and a handful of jerked venison. She learned to bank the fire so a single log would smolder all night. They fell into a rhythm that was more than just survival. It was a partnership. The change in Eli was slow, like the thawing of a glacier. He began to speak, not just words of necessity, but memories. He told her about his younger brother, Samuel, how the boy had once tried to tame a hawk and had the scars to prove it. He spoke of his father, a man who believed the law was something you carried in your own heart, not something a sheriff gave you. And Cora, in turn, began to smile. They were small smiles, ones that lit her eyes before they ever reached her mouth. She smiled when he returned from the hunt, stamping snow from his boots. She smiled when he ate the bread she had learned to bake in a cast-iron pot in the embers. She was no longer the hunted woman who had arrived in Bitter Creek. The fear had receded, leaving behind the quiet, resilient woman she had always been. The cabin itself changed. It was clean. She had scrubbed the soot from the stones of the hearth. She had bundled and hung the dried herbs she'd found, and the air smelled of pine and sage, not just of smoke and old leather. One day, when a rare, weak sun broke through the clouds, Eli took his axe and went outside. He began splitting the pine logs he had felled before the deepest snow. Cora followed him, wrapped in her cloak. "What are you building?" "A fence," he said. He did not stop his work. "A fence? For what?" "For a horse," he said, swinging the axe. "The one you rode. That gelding is still in my shed. We need to keep him from wandering when the melt comes." "We?" she asked, her voice quiet. Eli stopped. He lowered the axe and looked at her. "We," he said. They built it together. It was not a large fence, just a small corral between the cabin and the shed. He dug the post holes in the hard, semi-frozen ground, his breath pluming in the air. She helped him set the posts, holding them steady while he packed the dirt and rocks around their bases. They ran the rails, and when they were done, they stood back. It was crooked. It was small, but it was the first thing they had built together. It was an act of faith, a claim staked against the wilderness and against the past. That night, they sat by the fire. He was cleaning his rifle, and she was mending her own cloak. The silence was comfortable, shared. "I have never," she said, not looking up, "felt safe. Not in my father's house, not in that place, not in the saloon." She looked at him, her needle poised. "I feel safe here." Eli stopped his work. He looked at her, at the firelight on her face. "Cora, I am not a good man. You saw what I am." "I saw what they did to you," she said fiercely. "I know what you are. Eli, you are the man who came back for me." He reached across the small space and touched her hand. His fingers were rough, but his touch was gentle. He said nothing, but his eyes, those pale, clear eyes, told her everything she needed to know. Their peace lasted for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of quiet work, shared warmth, and the slow, fragile knitting together of 2 broken lives. Then trouble came again. It came on horseback, 3 men riding up the trail from town in the middle of the day. Eli saw them from the ridge. He was in the cabin in an instant, barring the door, his rifle in his hand. "Who is it?" Cora whispered, her face going pale, her hand at her throat. "Strangers," he said. "Not Jed Price. These are different. They ride good horses." The men stopped just outside the new, flimsy fence. They did not unholster their guns. They sat their horses looking at the cabin, at the wisp of smoke, at the lone horse in the corral. One man, wearing a fine coat with a fur collar, dismounted. He was older, with a thick gray beard and cold, blue eyes. He walked to the fence and rested his leather-gloved hands on the top rail. "This is private land," Eli called from the small window. "Is it?" the man called back. His voice was deep, full of authority. "I thought it was Thatcher land, or what was left of it." "Who are you?" Eli demanded. "My name is Amos Guthrie," the man said. "I own the valley, or most of it. I am missing this little piece. The water from this spring, it feeds the whole south pasture. I need it." "It is not for sale," Eli said. Guthrie laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Everything is for sale. Son, I am prepared to offer you $500 for this. Homestead, a fair price, considering the work it needs."
$500.
Cora gasped. It was a fortune, more money than she had ever imagined. "It is not for sale," Eli repeated, his voice flat. Guthrie's eyes narrowed. He looked at the cabin, his gaze lingering on the window where he knew Eli was, and then on the smaller, papered window of the loft. "I heard you had company. Thatcher, I heard you took in the little saloon girl, the one who got Jed Price arrested." Eli's grip on his rifle tightened. "I saw her. You know," Guthrie continued, his voice conversational. "At that ridiculous trial. A pretty thing, for all her trouble. Wasted up here, a woman like that. She belongs in a real house. I have a big house. Thatcher, with glass windows and silk dresses." He smiled. "You tell her. My offer extends to her as well. I am a generous man. I will take her off your hands. Give her a life." Eli pulled the hammer back on his rifle. The sound, a dry double click, was loud in the silence. The two men behind Guthrie put their hands on their pistols. "You have," Eli said, his voice a low, deadly growl. 10 seconds to get off my land, or the next offer I make will be in lead." Guthrie stared at the dark window. He had not expected this. He had expected a beaten, haunted man, easy to scare. $500, Guthrie said again, as if tasting the words. "That is my only offer. You think about it. You think about how cold the winter is, and how easy it is for a fire to start. By accident, of course." He turned, slowly, and mounted his horse. "You are a disposable man, Thatcher, living on my water, with a woman I have an eye for. You are making a poor choice." They turned their horses and rode away, their progress slow and arrogant, back down the trail. The moment they were gone, Cora turned on Eli. She was shaking, her face white with a terror he had not seen since the trial. "We must go," she said, grabbing his arm. "Did you hear him? $500. Eli, we can go south, to Colorado, to Oregon. We can buy a small place, a real place. We can be safe." She was begging. Her voice was cracking. "Please, Eli, he will do what he said. He will burn us out. I cannot go through that again. Not another fire. Please!" Eli stood like stone, his rifle still in his hand, his eyes on the trail where the men had disappeared. He was seeing a different set of riders. He was smelling different smoke. "Eli," she pleaded, tugging on his sleeve. "Sell it. It is just land. It is just a shack. I do not care about it. I care about us." "No." The word was quiet, but it was absolute. "No? What do you mean, no? He will kill us." Eli finally turned to her. He put his hands on her shoulders, his face full of a terrible, cold resolve. "Cora, I am done running." "This is not running. This is surviving." "No," he said, his voice harder. "I ran from the men who burned my home. I ran from the town. I hid up here for 6 years like a coward, on the one piece of land they did not take. I let them call me a ghost. I let them think I was cursed. I am done running." He looked around the small, mean cabin. He looked at the new fence outside. He looked at her. "This is not just land," he said, his voice thick. "It was my father's. He died for it. My brother died for it. It is mine. And now, it is ours." They came for you in that town. They tried to take you. Now they come for this. It is the same fight, do you not see? If we run now, we will never stop running."
Cora stared at him, her tears frozen on her cheeks. She saw the man he was, the man he had been, and the man he was deciding to be. Right here, in this moment. He was no longer a ghost. He was a man made of iron. Her fear did not go away. It just settled. It turned into something colder, something harder. She had stood up to a mob. She could stand up to this man. She slowly, deliberately, nodded her head. "Then what do we do?"
"We prepare," he said.
The fragile peace was over. The cabin became a fortress. The work of survival became the work of war.
Eli boarded up the large window,
leaving only a small 2-inch gap, just wide enough for a rifle barrel.
He did the same to the loft window. He reinforced the door, adding a second, heavier bar. Cora, her face grim, took on the task of ammunition. Eli had a small supply of lead, percussion caps, and powder. She sat by the fire, not mending, but melting the lead in a ladle, pouring the gleaming liquid metal into the small 2-ball bullet mold. Her hands, which had been raw from Lai and then gentle on his skin, were now steady as she trimmed the new, heavy slugs. She loaded the cylinders of his pistol. She filled his powder horn. Eli, meanwhile, worked outside. He did not just chop firewood. He felled 2 small trees and sharpened their ends, embedding them in the snow at an angle on the path up to the cabin. A crude defense to stop a horse. He took his bear traps, the ones he had not used in years, and set them, not on the trail, but in the deep drifts off to the side, where men seeking cover might hide. He covered them with a light dusting of snow. They both carried rifles now. He gave her his father's, a heavy, long-barreled rifle that was older, but accurate. He took her outside, into the biting cold, and made her shoot it until her shoulder was bruised and she could hit the knot on a pine tree 50 yards away. "Do not aim for the man," he told her, his voice impersonal, hard. "Aim for the torch or the horse, but if he gets to the door, Cora, you aim for the chest. You do not think, you just shoot." She nodded, her lips a thin, white line. They waited. 4 days passed. The silence in the cabin was worse than it had ever been. It was not the silence of peace, or the silence of tension. It was the silence of a held breath. Every gust of wind, every snap of a branch under the weight of snow, made them jump, their hands flying to their weapons. They slept in shifts, one of them always awake, sitting in the chair by the door, a rifle across their lap. On the 5th night, they came. It was long after midnight. The moon was a sliver, and the world was dark. A horse whinnied in the distance, a sound that did not belong to their gelding. Eli, who was on watch, touched Cora's shoulder. "They are here." Cora was instantly awake. She scrambled from the bedroll, grabbing the heavy rifle, and went to her post at the boarded-up west window. Eli stood by the door. They could hear them now. The creak of leather, the soft thud of hooves in snow. Then, voices. "Thatcher!" It was not Guthrie. It was the foreman. "You had your chance. We are here for the land. Come out with your hands high. Send the woman out first, and we will let you live." Eli and Cora said nothing. They waited, their hearts pounding in the dark. Smoky cabin. "Fools!" the foreman yelled. "Light them up!" Several torches flared in the darkness, bright orange spots against the blue-white snow. Cora counted 6 of them, 6 men, masked, holding burning brands. This was not an eviction. This was an extermination. It was Eli's past, come back to life. "They are trying to circle," Eli whispered, his voice calm. "To the shed. Do not fire until they are close. Let them come." A shot rang out. A bullet thudded into the heavy log wall of the cabin. Then another. They were shooting, trying to scare them out.
"Now, Eli!" a man shouted. Two of the torchbearers ran forward. They were heading for the cabin, intending to throw their torches on the roof. The one on the left, Eli said. He fired. His rifle boomed, the sound deafening inside the cabin. One of the men screamed and dropped his torch, clutching his leg. He had not aimed for the man. He had aimed for the trap. A high, terrible screaming sound ripped through the night as the man thrashed in the snow. His leg caught in the bear trap's steel jaws. The other man stopped, horrified. He raised his own rifle and fired wildly at the cabin. "Cora, the west!" Eli shouted, reloading, his movements fast and precise. A man on horseback was riding hard, circling around, trying to get to the back of the cabin. Cora saw him through her slit. He was low in the saddle, a torch in his hand. She rested the heavy barrel of her father-in-law's rifle in the groove. Her hands were shaking. She remembered Eli's words. "Do not think, just shoot." She aimed for the horse. She pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked back, slamming into her shoulder, bruising the bone. The horse screamed, a high, piercing sound, and went down in a tumbling heap, throwing its rider into a snowdrift. The man lay still. "Two down," Eli called, a grim note of pride in his voice. The attackers were stunned. They had expected a single terrified man. They found two defenders, armed and accurate. "Get him! Get him out of that trap!" the foreman roared. Two other men ran to their screaming companion. Eli fired again. He did not hit them. He put a bullet into the snowbank just in front of them, spraying them with ice. "Get back!" "They are shooting back!" Cora yelled. Bullets hammered the front of the cabin. Splinters of wood exploded from the door. Eli was no longer the empty, haunted ghost from the saloon. He was a man with something to lose. He fought with a cold, precise fury, moving from his post to the other window. His shots precise, his movements economical. He was not trying to kill. He was trying to win. He was protecting his home. The foreman was furious. His simple plan was in ruins. He had one man wounded, another one down. "Burn it! Just burn it all!" he shrieked. A man who had been hiding behind the shed ran for the cabin. He was close, too close. Eli was reloading. Cora was watching the man on the ground, who was starting to move. The man reached the cabin. He had a knife. He jammed it into the heavy wood of the door, carving a deep line. "Guthrie's land!" he yelled, and raised his arm to throw his torch onto the low, shingled roof. Cora turned. She saw him. She did not have time to aim. She lifted the rifle, pointed, and fired. The man grunted, a sound of profound surprise. He dropped the torch. He clutched his shoulder, staggered back, and fell to his knees. He had been so close she could see his eyes. That broke them. 3 men wounded, their horses scattered. The cabin was a fortress. "Back!" the foreman roared. "Get the men! Retreat! Retreat!" They grabbed their wounded, dragging them back to the horses, firing wildly into the dark. "It is not over! Thatcher!" the foreman screamed. "We will be back!" But as they left, one of them, the man Cora had unhorsed, ran past the shed. He was limping, but he was furious. He threw his own torch, not at the cabin, but onto the small pile of dry kindling stacked against the shed. The dry wood and the old shed went up in an instant, a whoosh of flame that lit the entire clearing. The men rode off, disappearing into the darkness, leaving their wounded comrades' screams behind. Inside the cabin, Eli and Cora were panting, their ears ringing. "They are gone," Cora whispered. "For now," Eli said. He looked out the slit. The shed was a pillar of fire, and the wind was blowing from the west. It was blowing the embers, a river of orange sparks, directly onto the side of the cabin. "The wall," Eli said, his voice flat with horror. The dry logs of the cabin wall, the wall where Cora had slept, began to smoke. Eli grabbed the water bucket. "Stay inside. Bar the door behind me." He threw the door open and ran out. He threw the bucket of water onto the smoking logs, but it was not enough. The fire in the shed was too hot, the wind too strong. The side of the cabin was beginning to catch. "Eli!" Cora screamed. She did not bar the door. She looked around, frantic. The water barrel was almost empty. She saw the blankets, their bedroll. She grabbed them, plunging them into the last of the water, soaking them. Ignoring his order, she ran outside, into the swirling smoke and heat. The air was thick with the smell of burning pine. "Cora, get back!" Eli roared. She did not listen. She ran to the cabin wall, where small, bright orange flames were now licking up the logs. She began beating the fire with the heavy, wet wool blanket. She beat it, her grunts of effort mixing with the roar of the fire. Embers rained down on her. They caught in her hair, on her dress. She did not feel them. She just beat the flames. Again and again. Eli, seeing the shed was lost, ran to her side. He took the other blanket and joined her, the two of them fighting a desperate battle against the inferno, just feet away. Cora dropped the blanket, her hands raw, her knuckles blistering. The fire was on the roof shingles. She used her bare hands, scraping at the burning wood, sobbing. The tears cut clean paths through the soot on her face, tears of pain and rage, and a terrible, desperate love for this small, ugly cabin. They beat it. The last flame on the cabin wall sputtered and died, leaving a large, blackened, smoking scar. The shed, its purpose served, collapsed in on itself, sending a final geyser of sparks into the dark sky. It was over. The clearing was silent, save for the crackle of the dying shed and the distant, fading screams of the man in the trap. Cora slumped against the smoking, ruined wall of her home. She looked at her hands. They were bright red, the skin already blistering. She was covered in soot, her dress singed, her hair full of ash. She looked at the burned shed, at the scarred door, and she began to weep. Eli stood, panting, his face black. He looked at the devastation. He looked at her, weeping against the wall, her hands raw. He crossed the space between them. He did not say a word. He bent down and lifted her into his arms, as if she weighed nothing. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his smoky, soot-covered shoulder. He carried her across the threshold, past the door carved with Guthrie's name, and into the dark, safe interior of the cabin. Smoke curled around them from the smoldering walls as he kicked the door shut, sealing them inside. The cabin was thick with the smell of wet, charred wood. Outside, in the blue-gray light of dawn, the man in the trap had finally fallen silent. The only sounds were the hiss of the dying embers from the shed and the drip of water from the eaves. Cora sat on the chair by the hearth, her hands in a bowl of icy water from the spring. They were red, the skin split and blistering, but she felt no pain. She just felt numb. Eli knelt before her. He had a tin of axle grease, the only salve he owned, and a clean rag. Gently, he took her left hand from the water and began to dry it, his touch as light as a moth's. His own face was black with soot, a cut above his eye weeping a thin line of red. He had not slept. He had spent the hours after the fire watching the trail, his rifle across his knees, a dark, silent guardian. When he had been sure the attackers were not returning, he had gone out. He had disarmed the man in the trap, who was alive but weak, his leg broken. He had tied his hands. The other man, the one Cora had shot from the horse, had dragged himself into the trees. Eli found him, unconscious from a broken arm and the cold. He had dragged him back and tied him up. 2. They were now sitting against the one remaining wall of the burned shed, prisoners of the war they had started. This will hurt," Eli said, his voice rough, hoarse from smoke. He opened the grease tin. Cora nodded, her eyes fixed on his face. She did not flinch as he carefully, painstakingly, covered her raw skin with the thick, dark grease. His hands, calloused and scarred, were impossibly gentle. When he was done, he wrapped both her hands in strips of cloth torn from one of his own shirts. They looked like white, clumsy paws. "I cannot cook," she whispered, the first words she had spoken. It was a practical, absurd thought. "I will cook," he said. He stood, and they both looked at the cabin. The door was scarred with Guthrie's name. The west wall was a map of the fire, a huge blackened patch that smelled of ruin. A sound came from the trail. Horses. Eli was across the room in an instant, his rifle in his hand, his body flattened against the wall. He motioned for Cora to get down, to move away from the door. "Eli Thatcher," a voice called. It was not Guthrie. "This is Sheriff Brody. I am coming in. Do not shoot." Eli and Cora exchanged a look. Brody. He had not come alone. Through the slit in the wall, Cora could see him. He had 2 deputies with him, men she did not recognize. "Come ahead, Sheriff," Eli called out, his voice flat. He did not lower his rifle. Sheriff Brody dismounted, his face grim. He had aged 10 years since the mock trial. He stopped dead when he saw the clearing. His eyes went from the bullet-riddled front of the cabin to the smoking, collapsed ruin of the shed. Then his gaze fell on the 2 men, tied and shivering, one of them groaning, his leg at a terrible angle. "Sweet Mother of God," Brody muttered. He looked at the cabin door, at the deeply carved words. "Guthrie?" It was not a question. "His men," Eli said. He stepped out onto the porch, his rifle still held at his side. He was covered in soot, his eyes red from the smoke. He looked like a creature born of fire and rage. "They came last night, with torches." Brody walked around the cabin, his boots sinking into the slush. He saw the dead horse. He saw the black scarred wall where Cora and Eli had beaten out the flames. He saw the bear trap, its teeth still stained. He looked back at Eli, and for the first time, he looked at him not as a ghost, but as a man who had been pushed too far. "Jed Price confessed," Brody said, his voice quiet. "The whole thing, how he killed Walter, how he planted the brooch. He told us Guthrie promised to pay his debts if he got rid of Miss Bellamy and you." Brody looked at Cora, who had stepped out onto the porch behind Eli, her bandaged hands held in front of her, his face flushed with a deep, visible shame. "Ma'am," he said, taking off his hat. I was wrong. I was a fool, and I let my town. I am sorry." Cora just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "These men," Eli said, gesturing with his rifle. "They work for Guthrie." Brody nodded. He turned to his deputies. "Cut them loose. Get them on their horses. They are under arrest for attempted murder, for arson." The sheriff looked back at Eli. This land, it is yours, Thatcher, by law. Guthrie has no claim. I rode out to his ranch this morning. He is being taken to the territorial marshal. He will not be bothering you again." He holstered his pistol and looked at the 2 of them, standing together in the ash. "From this day, Eli Thatcher and Cora Bellamy are under the protection of the law in this town, my protection. If any man rides up this trail uninvited, you have my leave to defend your property." It was an apology. It was an admission. It was, finally, justice. Eli just nodded. He watched as the deputies loaded the prisoners, and as the small posse rode away, taking the criminals from his land. The news spread through Bitter Creek faster than the fire had spread through the shed. The story was told in the saloon, in the mercantile. Guthrie, the untouchable ranch baron, was gone. Jed Price was in a cell, and Eli Thatcher, the haunted ghost of the mountain, was just a man who had fought for his home and for his woman. The town, slowly, began to shift. The guilt of what they had almost done to Cora ran deep. They had been fooled by Guthrie and Jed,
and Eli had been the one to show them the truth. A few days later, Cora was outside, sweeping the ash from the porch, her bandaged hands clumsy on the broom, when she saw someone walking up the trail. It was a woman, young, wearing a dark blue coat. Cora stopped, her heart thumping. The woman stopped a safe distance away. Miss Bellamy." "Yes? My name is Evangeline Walker. I am the school teacher." She was twisting her hands in her gloves. I was at the saloon. That day, I believed them. I believed what they said about you. I whispered, too." Cora said nothing. She just watched the young woman. "What you did, what Mr. Thatcher did, it was brave, and I'm ashamed. I am so ashamed." Miss Walker stepped forward and placed a small, cloth-wrapped object on the new corral fence. I brought you this. It is not much. Some vegetable seeds for the spring and a book. It is just, I'm sorry." The young woman turned and practically ran back down the trail. Cora walked to the fence. She unwrapped the bundle. Inside were small paper packets of seeds and a thin book of poetry. She opened it. She had not held a book in almost a year. Another day, Eli was splitting wood when a small boy, no older than 10, darted out from the trees. He ran to the porch, dropped a small glass jar, and bolted, disappearing back into the pines like a rabbit. Eli walked over. He picked up the jar. It was honey. He looked at the trail where the boy had gone. A small, almost invisible smile touched his mouth. The spring melt came late, but it came with a fury. The creek roared. A brown, churning river, and the snows receded, leaving the ground wet and muddy and smelling of life. Eli began to rebuild. He did not rebuild the shed. He began to build a barn. He used the logs from the trees he had felled for the siege, and he felled new ones. It was a proper barn, with a stall for the gelding and a small loft for hay. Cora was always beside him. Her hands had healed, but they were no longer the hands of a lady in waiting. They were scarred, red and tough from the fire and the work. Her dress, the one she had worn during the attack, was singed at the hem, but she wore it with a strange pride. Her eyes, once haunted by fear, were brighter. They were the eyes of a woman who had faced a fire and not been consumed. She helped him. She held the logs steady as he notched them. She learned to use a small handsaw, cutting planks for the door. They worked in a comfortable, practiced silence, their movements fitting together. They had never spoken of marriage. The word felt too small. It was a word for churches and white dresses and people who had not been through what they had. What they had was more elemental. It had been forged in a blizzard, tested by a mob, and sealed by gunfire. One evening, they sat inside. The cabin was warm. The scarred wall was a reminder, a map of their survival. Eli had been quiet all day, working on something small in his lap as he sat by the fire, his knife flashing. Cora was kneading dough for the next day's bread, her scarred hands strong in the flour. "Cora," he said. She looked up. He held out his hand. He was not a man for words, not these words. He stood up and walked to her. He took her left hand, the one with the worst of the fire scars across the knuckles. "Your hands," he said, his voice rough. He traced the scar with his thumb. "They are ugly," she whispered. "They are strong," he said. They saved this home. They saved me." He opened his other hand. On his calloused palm lay a ring. It was not silver. It was not gold. It was a simple, thin band of antler, carved from the tine of a deer, polished so smooth it shone with a dull, milky light in the fire. He did not ask. He did not make a speech. He just looked into her eyes, and she looked into his. He slipped the ring onto her fourth finger. It fit perfectly. Cora looked at the ring, then at him.
her eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. This was not a moment for tears. It was a moment of strength. She put her hand on his chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of his heart. She whispered, "You need me, Cowboy." A lifetime of pain, of solitude, of ice, melted from his face. He covered her hand with his own, pressing it against his heart. "I know," he answered. The spring finally, truly, arrived. The first brave shoots of green poked through the mud. Cora took the seeds Miss Walker had given her, and the seeds Eli had bought on a trip to town, and she started her garden. In the patch of rich earth by the new barn, she planted. Eli had tilled the soil for her, and she crumbled the dark earth between her fingers, planting beans and carrots and potatoes. It was a garden of hope. She worked in the soft sun, her hand often straying from the seeds to her own belly, resting there. It was a secret, a fragile, flickering hope she held inside her, a new life that had been conceived not in shame, but in the fierce, protective love that had burned brighter than any fire. A week later, Eli needed supplies from town. He had to buy seed corn and nails and more flour. He pulled on his coat. He walked to the door, where his rifle had leaned, loaded, for months. Cora watched him. He stood in front of it for a long second. He looked at the long, dark barrel. He looked at the scarred door, at the open window where the afternoon sun was streaming in. He turned, leaving the rifle where it was. He looked at Cora. He did not say a word. He just nodded. Then he walked out, mounted his horse, and rode down the trail. For the first time in almost 7 years, Eli Thatcher rode into Bitter Creek without his rifle. He rode down the main street. The blacksmith, hammering at his anvil, looked up. He paused his hammer, and then he nodded. Just a simple nod. Eli nodded back. He tied his horse outside the mercantile. The women on the boardwalk, the same ones who had spat at Cora's name, looked down at their feet. One of them, a young mother, pulled her child back, and then, looking ashamed, pushed him forward. Eli walked into the store. The storekeep, who had once served Cora last, turned from another customer. "Mr. Thatcher, good to see you. What can I get for you today?" No one raised a voice. No one whispered. The ghost was gone. In his place was just a man, a neighbor. Summer came, bathing the high country in a soft, green light. The garden was thriving. The nights were warm, the wind gentle. One evening, Eli came in from the barn. He had been mending a harness. Cora was at the hearth, stirring a pot of stew. The cabin smelled of rabbit and wild onions. She had left her boots by the door. She was barefoot, the floorboards smooth beneath her feet. He stopped, washing his hands in the basin, watching her. The firelight caught the simple, pale band on her hand. He had not taken off his own boots, but he was in his sock feet. The cabin was quiet. There was no music. There was only the sound of the stew bubbling and the crickets outside the open door. He dried his hands and walked to her. He held out his hand. She looked at it, then at his face. A small smile, a real one, touched her lips. She put her hand in his. He drew her to the center of the small room. He put his arm around her waist, and she put her hand on his shoulder. And they danced. It was a slow, shuffling circle on the rough planked floor. There was no music. They did not need it. They moved as one, in the quiet rhythm they had built from ash and snow. It was not a dance of passion. It was a dance of peace. Cora let out a long, slow breath and leaned her head forward, resting her forehead against his chest. She closed her eyes. She could hear the strong, steady beat of his heart under her ear. It was the only sound she needed. Outside, the wind moved through the tall pines. It carried no smoke. It carried no threats. It carried only the soft, golden light of the evening, filtering down through the new, green leaves of the trees. Thank you for listening to our story. Please comment where you are listening from to connect with others.
Subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in English.